Coalition, 86th weekly meeting in a row, established with the intention of unifying forces internationally for the common purpose of mankind, the goal, the obviously unifying goal of establishing peace based on a new security and development architecture. We've made significant advance. The world, however, remains an extraordinarily dangerous place, but one at the same time with tremendous opportunities and potential. We have a number of speakers lined up for today. We will begin in a moment with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. We then have Colonel Richard Black, or Senator, former state senator from Virginia, Richard Black, Graham Fuller, who I think has just joined us. That's good. Larry Johnson as well. And then we have a video interview from Alan Lee Green on the Israeli situation, the Gaza situation, and so on. So without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Helga for her introductory remarks.
Let me greet all of you. I think the world is relieved that, we have a new president in the United States. And while, not everything is clear already how it will go, and we have several people who are more in a position to tell us from the inside what to be expected from Trump, I can only speak about the overall situation, how it looks from Europe, from the rest of the world. And I think that, it's definitely a relief. I think a bombshell was dropped immediately by President Trump signing an executive order that the files concerning the assassination of John F. Kennedy will be released in 15 days. Now, this is a bombshell because, this is going to be a Pandora's box, which will, lead the world to many threats, leading to what is wrong, or what has been wrong with the United States, up to what people call the deep states. At least that's what I'm pretty sure will happen. Then concerning the assassination of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King, he has said this will be released in 45 days, that all of these releases, about which he had said in his first administration, I think it was in a discussion with Judge Napolitano, where he said, if you would have seen what I saw, you would also have not released them. But obviously now he has changed his mind, and he said this has been long overdue, and it is in the interest of the public that these should be released. So this is big. This is really big. It will have international ramification for the obvious reasons. Now, also, today we have the 24th, so in 6 days, on January 20th, according to Politico, the Senate Intelligence Committee and Judiciary Committee hearings in the Senate will take place, strangely followed by a closed-door session. I don't know if that's usual. Maybe one of the speakers after me can shed some light of what that means. In any case, so these are extremely promising signs. Now, there are many, many other changes underway. Some of them definitely good, some of them problematic, at least from an international point of view. One of them is that yesterday evening, President Trump told reporters that, he thought that NATO should be reviewed, that he was not sure that the United States should pay anything for it. Well, that's not the worst in the universe. He said that concerning the allies, that he is not sure if the United States is protecting them. They are not protecting us, meaning the Americans. Then he demanded that the Europeans should spend 5% of their GDP on military expenses, which I think is absolutely unacceptable from a European point of view, because this would already absolutely catastrophic economic condition, for example, in Germany, would just bring it over the Jordan. And rumors are that he wants to pull out 20,000 troops from Europe, maybe to redeploy them into the Pacific area. This is not yet very clear. Now, that is one thing. Then the other situation naturally is what will happen in the Middle East. One has to give the credit to President Trump that he brought about the ceasefire. It is very clear that there was a plan already last March, ready to sign, but Biden and Blinken did not enforce it. And, President Trump sent his envoy Witkoff, obviously delivering a message which forced Netanyahu to comply, which proves it could have been done all along, which means that all the many deaths which have happened since then go into the account of the Biden administration. Now, the situation is far from settled because the big question is, will there be a phase 2 and 3, or will Israel, giving into the pressure of some in the cabinet, just skip the whole thing once all the hostages are delivered by Hamas, and then, they will just go back to their previous mode? That is not so clear. Private security firms from the US and Egypt are about to be deployed to take over the security control of Gaza. I don't know if these private security controls are a protection against an escalation of the situation. I don't know. The big worry naturally is by the Palestinians in particular that on the West Bank, there will be a repetition of what just happened in Gaza, because in the recent period, dozens of new checking points have been set up, preventing farmers to reaching their farms, and even sealing off entire cities, such as Hebron and Bethlehem. And, there is a big worry that, the West Bank is still up to be cleansed, like it was attempted in Gaza. In any case, what we are doing, and we will hear some of this, we are calling for the immediate injection of a different policy with the Oasis plan. Because, if the US administration would put their weight now behind the Oasis plan, meaning not only the economic reconstruction of Gaza, but the economic buildup of the entire region with producing more water, with creating, industrial production, forests, agriculture, infrastructure, you would create a dynamic for peace. So we have called on all participants of the IPC process and also previous conferences by the Schiller Institute to endorse the Oasis plan and put it on the agenda. It's maybe a short window of opportunity where the situation can be changed. So I'm calling upon all of you to support that, and we will discuss it throughout this call. Now, other topics which are relevant naturally is that we know that the real Achilles heel of the transatlantic system is the pending bankruptcy of the transatlantic system. And President Trump, in his speech to Davos, has chosen to address it his way, the Trump way, by calling on the whole world to just invest in the United States, enjoy the biggest tax breaks you can get anywhere, have the cheapest energy prices. And if you don't do that, then you will face massive tariffs. Trillions of dollars will be pushed into the coffers of the US state budget this way, Trump is saying. He praised the Saudis that they already promised to invest $600 billion in the United States and told them just upgraded it to 1 trillion. So it's, he has already announced 25% tariffs against Canada and Mexico. He has not yet said anything in respect to the European Union. I can only say that, the tariff policy is a very, very problematic tool. German industry, for example, is already affected by their investments in Mexico, where they are producing cars and other things for the American market. So if now, in addition, tariffs would be implemented in respect to the EU, it could be devastating for Europe, and it may lead to a short-term benefit for the United States, but it would for sure worsen the condition on the international scene, because tariffs are valuable if they protect a nascent country, but not as a policy means among major economies in the world. Now that remains to be seen and requires our intervention. Now, the Secretary of State Rubio has announced that his first trip will go to Panama, obviously discussing the Panama Canal and the role of the Chinese there, not only in Panama, but in all of Latin America. Now, we have been saying the whole time that the problems of Latin America could be best addressed if the United States and China work together, for example, in such projects as the Bi-Oceanic Railway, and not by a continuation of the policy which the Biden administration had, threatening Latin American countries to cut relationship with China. Now that we will see as well. Now the situation with the EU otherwise, the EU is clearly now, they're completely freaked out. All the pro-Atlanticists are, in a state of disarray, but the centrifugal tendencies in the EU are there. The pro-Atlanticist faction is now calling all the more for militarization to compensate whatever is not being invested in weapons and troops and so forth by the United States. This is very bad for Germany. We have a chancellor candidate from the CDU, which is leading in the polls, Friedrich Merz, who is, in his speech in Davos, said, oh, it's no problem if Trump wants us to invest more in the United States or buy more products from the United States. We can buy more weapons. We can buy more LNG gas. That gas is 5 times the price than in the United States. In other words, it will ruin Europe. It will ruin Germany. So, and then naturally he was the head of the board of BlackRock before he restarted his career in the CDU. Now there is a video by Kennedy Jr. on BlackRock, and I can only advise all of you not only watch this video, but give it the widest possible distribution. It's excellent because what Kennedy does in that video, he shows exactly how the BlackRock structure is what is behind the wars, how they own all the military industrial firms, the weapon producers, how they are really behind the Wall Street system as such, and how they also are already set to jump into the reconstruction of Ukraine. If this Merz would become German chancellor, I think this would be the worst outcome, because he wants to send the Taurus, even if the United States is now governed by a different president. So the best thing could happen is if Trump would change the dynamic in the 4 weeks before we have the German election on the 23rd, because it's not written in stone that Friedrich Merz must become the new chancellor, which I think would be very bad. Now, the EU is in a state of total disarray. It's not undangerous, because in Slovakia, the Prime Minister Fico, who, as you remember, there had been an assassination attempt where he had already blamed foreign forces to be behind it. And now he called 2 days ago an emergency session of the Slovak Security Council, by saying that there is an immediate threat of an overthrow of the Slovak government and that foreign agents and experts are already in the country. So that needs to be watched. Also, the fact that the so-called foreign minister of the EU is Kaja Kallas from Estonia, and she is the worst hawk you have ever heard. She's worse than von der Leyen, worse than anybody else, and she is keep running around saying that Russia is an existential threat to the European Union, which caused the head of the Patriot Party in France to call her a crazy person. Now, I cannot contradict her on that. Now, lastly, Trump is going to go to Los Angeles and he will look at the result of the fires. And there, one should note one thing, these fires are obviously not a natural catastrophe. Trump himself noted the fact that the water management was blocked, which would have refilled the reservoirs for the fire department to put down the flames. But more largely, this is the result that the NAWAPA, North American Water and Policy Product, was not built in the 60s because this would have brought down the waters from the far northwest of the continent, from the Mackenzie and Alaska River Basin. And over time, it would have led to development of vegetation, regional weather systems, downfall of rain, and basically the extreme weather patterns would not have developed. You would have an amelioration of the droughts and the desert winds, including the Santa Ana winds. And I just want to note it in this context. In the 60s, both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert Kennedy were in favor of building this NAWAPA project. The fact that they were assassinated for sure contributed to the result we have seen with these fires. So one could say, that these murders, that there is such a thing as natural law, and that, if you don't stop this and uncover the cover-up, there is such a force as natural law working. And I think the fires in California are a reflection of such a natural law. So one more reason to look forward to the discovery of these files. And, I want to say, obviously the world is in a completely different situation than a week ago. It's very promising, but it's also, still many things can go wrong. And therefore, our focus on solutions, the Oasis plan, and more broadly, that we absolutely need to overcome geopolitics and move to a new paradigm of cooperation between the countries of the West with the countries of the global South in the creation of a new security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. And I don't think a peace in the world will be accomplished without that condition. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you very much, Helga, for your introductory overview of the global situation, this rapidly moving situation. We also are going to have available in the course of the discussion coming ahead a brief clip from the Oasis plan video, which we prepared. And I think people will find that very, very useful to conceptualize exactly the kinds of solutions that we're talking about here. The next speaker we have is Colonel Richard Black, also former State Senator Richard Black from Virginia. He's the former head of the U.S. Army's Criminal Law Division at the Pentagon, and he has the floor now. Please go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Dennis. This is a very exciting time in many ways, and one of the most important things that's happening is that with the nominations that President Trump has made to various offices, there is now underway a rather major assault on the deep state and an attempt to rein in the rogue intelligence agencies. Now, what we have happening is on Wednesday, next Wednesday, January 29th, the Senate Judiciary Committee will conduct confirmation hearings for Kesh Patel, who is Trump's nominee for the FBI. Now, this is going to happen on the same day as the committee votes on Pam Bondi, who is the nominee for Attorney General. I have the impression that Pam Bondi has in her pocket all of the votes she needs to win. She's been very bold and very outspoken in refuting attacks on her by the Democrats. So I sense in her a tremendous sense of confidence. So the other one who will be in hearings on that same day is Kesh Patel for the FBI. Now it's interesting, Kesh Patel has written that the FBI is now the prime functionary of the deep state. The Democrats are in a real state of concern. They are frightened by Patel, and probably not just Democrats, but some of the neocon Republicans. Patel wrote a book entitled Government Gangsters, the Deep State, the Truth, and the Battle for Our Democracy. President Trump praised this as a roadmap to end the deep state's reign. Now, the book listed 60 members of the deep state, including Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton, Merrick Garland, Bill Barr, Robert Mueller, James Comey, and many others. These are people that Kesh Patel has identified as being associated with the deep state. Now, in nominating Kesh Patel for FBI, President Trump mentioned his role in uncovering the Russia hoax, and which the Russia hoax was a situation in which the FBI, specifically an FBI lawyer by the name of Kevin Kleinsmith, who later pled guilty to falsifying a document in the debunked probe into whether Trump's 2016 campaigns was somehow colluding with the Russian government. The hoax was based on a very, very suspect dossier prepared by an individual with British intelligence for the Hillary Clinton campaign, and it made all sorts of wild and kind of ridiculous claims about Trump. And in any event, Kevin Kleinsmith was the individual who literally deliberately falsified a document, which was then later used by the FBI to get an illicit FISA warrant, allowing the FBI to spy on the Trump campaign as it was preparing to enter office. And as a result, this destabilized the Trump presidency almost from the outset. So this was a conspiracy of the Federal Bureau of Investigation to destabilize and hopefully, in their view, hopefully to oust Trump from the presidency. So it was a matter of greatest national interest. What was going on? Potentially the biggest conspiracy in American history, or at least certainly one of the worst. Now, the The FBI has a long and storied history of corruption and leftist political activity. I note that there was a very recent Freedom of Information Act response to journalist Aaron Matei, and it raises new questions about the FBI's role in the Russiagate affair. The response, true to form, was almost entirely redacted by the FBI. However, one disclosure was that the deputy director of the FBI, Andrew McCabe, opened an investigation of Trump after President Trump had taken office in 2016. And the record by Andrew McCabe says that the investigation was being opened due to information that reasonably indicates that President Donald Trump may be or has been wittingly or unwittingly involved in activities for or on behalf of the Russian government, which may constitute violations of criminal law or threats to the national security of the United States. So the claim being made by the FBI, the assertion and the way that they were trying to orchestrate things was really a dagger at the heart of the American system. And it was an attempt, I believe, to bring down the President of the United States. This is of some special interest when I see the name Andrew McCabe, because his wife ran against me for Virginia Senate, and I am aware that there were some very fishy arrangements with Governor Terry McAuliffe, who was the governor of Virginia at the time, and there were apparently discussions that not only involved his wife's run against me and how that would be financed, massively financed, but also there may have been discussions about how Andrew McCabe would be elevated within the FBI. He later did become in a position to where he could have some control over the investigation into Hillary Clinton and her deliberate destruction of a great number of email records. So in any event, we do see this looming change within the FBI, where we have somebody potentially who will become the head of the FBI, who will take on a very deep reign of corruption within that organization. Now, in addition, we are very soon going to have the confirmation hearings on Tulsi Gabbard. Now, she has been nominated as the Director of National Intelligence, which puts her in charge of 18 intelligence agencies. Why we need that many, I don't know. I wish we would get rid of about 2/3 of them. But this is very much a part of the deep state. We have this vast, secretive enterprise, and we would like to think that these people are all out there simply protecting us from all of these nefarious, vague foreign threats out there. But the fact is that, for the most part, the intelligence agencies of the United States have as their principal objective shaping the narrative that will aid in the control of the American populace. We are constantly told that this country and that country and the other country is an imminent threat to us. And while we get worried about whether a balloon floats over the United States. Meanwhile, all kinds of nefarious things are being done that people are not paying attention to. So Tulsi Gabbard will be going before the Senate Intelligence Committee next Thursday, January 30th. And Chairman Tom Cotton has now agreed to support her after she agreed to support Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That provision allows the U.S. to spy on foreigners overseas without a warrant. The problem that many conservatives have with it is that there is a quiet agreement between Great Britain and the United States that kind of an understanding that they will spy on Americans, we will spy on Brits, and there will be an exchange of information. Hopefully, if Tulsi is placed as the Director of National Intelligence, she will be able to correct that type of under-the-table dealings, which violate the Fourth Amendment rights of American citizens. Now, Tulsi is, she is very unpopular, just like Kesh Patel, by the neocons and by the Democratic Party. She will be attacked for her understanding of the Russian views of the events in Ukraine. She is not very favorably inclined to pumping up the war in Ukraine. She thinks that it needs to be resolved in a way that is respectful. And of course, that earns her many enemies. They call her a Putin stooge. It's become very popular within the deep state. Anybody who examines the facts behind foreign policy issues is viewed as a stooge. If you don't just automatically accept the propaganda that's being put out, you're a stooge of this group or that group. Tulsi is under attack for visiting President Bashar al-Assad of Syria in 2017. Now, I was the first U.S. official or first American official to visit with President Assad in 2016. She visited him a year later, 2017. Now, just recently, of course, the government of Syria fell, and the deep state immediately said this is a great triumph of democracy over tyranny. Well, the whole deep state apparatus never will talk about the group that we have supported unwaveringly since we decided to overthrow Syria. And the group that has emerged victorious is Al-Qaeda in Syria. Now, it goes by a different name. They actually have changed their name several times, but the group that has taken is Al-Qaeda in Syria. And just recently, January the 19th of this year, NBC reported that the new foreign minister of this wonderful democratic organization is Shadi al-Waisi, who was a Sharia law judge who was twice filmed ordering the execution of women on camera. One of the women, she was a mother, and she begged for a last word with her children before being executed, but he said no. He said, go ahead, and he ordered a man to put a pistol to the back of her head, blow her brains out. Her crime, apparently it was prostitution or adultery. This is under the fundamentalist early view of Islam, in which there was just merciless treatment of anybody by early Islam, and those types of practices are now being endorsed within the new democratic regime. Now, it's important to recognize this is Al Qaeda in Syria, this new regime, and the head of this, Mohammed al-Jawlani, he's now the head of the new government of Syria, and until several days after he took power, you could look on the internet and you could look him up. There was a $10 million bounty on him, dead or alive, by the U.S. government. Both the FBI and the Treasury Department listed him as having close links with Al Qaeda in Syria and with ISIS. And so when he took over the country with the help of the Biden administration, Turkey, and Israel, he changed his hairstyle. He got some slick back. He changed his hair. He took off his military uniform. He put on a suit and tie. He announced that he was a new good guy in town. He was going to be fair to everyone. It's important to understand that Al Qaeda was the same group that flew the passenger jets into the Twin Towers in the Pentagon on 9/11, killing 3,000 innocent Americans, and the largest attack on American territory since the revolution. And now realize that what happened is that back in 2007, the U.S. decided to overthrow the legitimate government of Syria and to install terrorists that we knew from the outset were affiliated with Al Qaeda. And for 13 years, we gave unwavering support to Al Qaeda. We did this through a CIA-supplied program called Program Timber Sycamore. And we did this knowing that the group, Al-Qaeda in Syria, which at the time was called al-Nusra, was conducting a sustained, organized campaign of mass rape. They were engaged in the beheading of thousands and thousands of civilians and POWs, crucifixions and immolations. And in any event, these are the people that now we're saying, well, Tulsi Gabbard, why were you questioning what the U.S. government was done? Now, Tulsi Gabbard introduced, as a congresswoman from Hawaii, she introduced in 2016 the Stop Arming Terrorists Act, which was an attempt to stop the U.S. government from providing assistance to Al Qaeda, ISIS, or other terrorist groups. These groups are very much at the heart of U.S. foreign policy, and these groups are used to destabilize various nations, particularly in the Middle East. If we can see Tulsi Gabbard as a voice of reason and as a person who will scrutinize the activities of intelligence, it will potentially be a significant wound to the deep state. So these are things, Kesh Patel, Pam Bondi, of course, in the Attorney General's seat, and then with Tulsi Gabbard. Together, if these people can all be confirmed, I think we're going to see a sustained pressure on the deep state that will be very good and can only be beneficial to the freedom of the American people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Black, for that in-depth discussion of this. Let me just inform people, in case you don't know, that the LaRouche organization, if I can find this, I'm going to share this on my screen. The LaRouche organization has published a document, a 16-page document called the Liars Bureau, which includes a fairly lengthy discussion of a number of different cases of this sort. I'm going to try to put up a picture here if I can for you to take a look at this. The point that I wanted to make, here we go. All right. That is the document, the Liars Bureau. There was a significant number of organizers, well over a dozen organizers, in Washington, D.C., on Capitol Hill this week, in the Senate, in the House as well, talking to aides, congressmen, and so on, and presenting this information and getting this around widely. It's all on the question of exactly the issues of Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel. I'm hoping, confident that in the course of the discussion period, some of the people who were involved in that mobilization will be able to give us a report back on how that went, responses they got, and plans for the future. Let me now turn the floor over to Graham Fuller, former U.S. diplomat, CIA official, and Islamic scholar, to get his perspective on the current situation. Go right ahead. You have to unmute, please. There we go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Yeah, good. Two issues that I
Très bien. Il y a deux points que je voudrais soulever aujourd'hui.
The French interpreter, please go on to the French channel.
Oh,
You're on
pardon.
Do I need to do something?
You don't.
No, you're fine.
Okay. I live in Canada, in fact, in Montreal, but I don't want to have to give the talk in French. I'm not quite up to that yet, but anyway, I'm working on it. In any case, two major issues that I'd like to bring up today. One fairly familiar to us, the other very unfamiliar to us. But the first one is simply examining the problem of American approach to the BRICS organization. I think almost all of your listeners are familiar with the BRICS grouping of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which has now been expanded into 14 more states that have joined. And it is now one of the most important geopolitical and economic forces in the world, comprising vast parts of global economy, and increasingly seeking to change the long, hundreds, centuries long domination of global politics by a small group of Western former colonial nations for the most part. Anyway, the thing that really matters here is that if the United States decides that the BRICS organization, because of its desire to bring greater strength and focus upon global politics from the so-called global South, if the United States views this as a threat, I think we are moving rapidly into a new kind of polarization that very different from the Cold War, but nonetheless extremely destructive to the interests of almost everybody. So in this context, I think we need to take a look at the potential of a renewal of the JCPOA. This is, I think most people are familiar with it. This was the treaty or agreement that was signed with Iran quite some time back, to hold, by which he would agree to hold off on any further nuclear research and development. It is now, as we just saw this last week, a very important development by which Russia and Iran, who have been at loggerheads over many centuries in one way or another, an agreement between the two to work on economic, political, cultural, and other issues, and including environmental issues, but that brings these two countries now much closer together than they have been in a very long time. Will the United States see this as a threat, or will they see this as an opportunity to greatly expand its area of cooperation and work both with Iran and with Russia? If the United States is willing to work with Russia to renew the JCPOA, which would, as I say, limit limit Iranian nuclear development, this would be a boon for the whole region. Obviously, Israel is intensely concerned with this issue, but Europe had signed on this quite some time ago. The United States had seen it in its interests, and even Russia. So if the United States is capable now of working with Russia to reconstitute this agreement, I think we would see a new spirit of cooperation between the United States and Russia that could gradually build confidence and also extend slowly towards the problem in Ukraine. The problem is not the same, but Iran is involved in the Ukrainian war through its sale of drone weapons to Ukraine. This would provide as I say, a new setting for major cooperation on a major crisis international issue. Perhaps only Israel might not be entirely happy to see the JCPOA renewed, but almost all of the rest of the world would see it as a huge step back from potential war between especially between the United States and Iran. To that extent, Israel may not welcome such a step, but it would be in a minority view on that situation. So there are great opportunities here, I think, to change the mood of the global situation, and particularly between Russia and the United States, on a very positive program. The second issue that I'd like to raise, which is much more exotic, has not been, but I'm trying to expand the envelope here in thinking. I don't even have any positive suggestions to make except to raise a very interesting issue, which actually was raised by Donald Trump, I think, to the surprise of the world, which was mentioning Greenland and the potential purchase of Greenland by the United States. And if it was not for sale, as I think Denmark essentially controls Greenland. Greenland stated that it was not for sale, in which case Trump suggested that perhaps it might even need to be taken by military means. Why should this matter at all? I think there's some very interesting opportunities here. This is really blue sky thinking as to what the issues are involved. But one of the key points of this whole thing is that Canada actually has even a greater interest in the status of Greenland. As you know, Greenland is viewed by Trump and by many U.S. strategists as being critical to U.S. defense. I'm not quite sure how that completely computes, but that is the belief among many security specialists. But it's important to remember that if you look at the map, Canada and Greenland are virtually hand in glove with each other geographically, very close proximity. And if Greenland was to belong to anybody else, it would be to Canada, logically speaking. But what makes this more interesting is that Greenland, of course, is populated by an ethnic group broadly called Inuits. It used to be called Eskimos, but the terms are interchangeable. Between Canada and Greenland, the vast number of Inuit population, which is not huge. I mean, we're talking something barely 200,000 people all told, but the territory under Inuit control runs all the way from Alaska, all the way across from Canada. It's the single biggest province in Canada. It extends deeply into the province of Quebec. And more to the point, the Inuits themselves as a people have had a long, several thousand years of history of living in these extraordinarily difficult environmental conditions and adapting to it and developing very keen sense of environmental protection that is so important as we see the North and South poles melting. So what I'm suggesting here and pointing out is that the population that dominates the entire northern polar regions, the circumpolar region, is essentially ethnically Inuit, the same people. The dialects differ, perhaps consider more or less depending on the area. But if anyone were to talk about Inuit desire for greater control, and they do have great desire for greater control within, not only within Canada, but within Greenland, we could see a very new geopolitical situation in which, in effect, Canada could be in support of a Inuit unification in some sense or other, and it would have direct impact on the geopolitical struggle that I fear we see looming all the way in the circumpolar region, which is now, as you know, being plied by ships from Russia, from Europe, and now even from China that are moving into those waterways. If there is a geopolitical importance to Greenland, it involves the Inuit peoples who exclusively dominate that entire region from Alaska to Greenland. And it might offer new opportunities that would move it out of the military zone, especially if the Inuits were to become quite independent and be able to, and Canada, of course, which itself has not been among the most militant of nations compared to the United States. So there are very interesting opportunities here that need to be looked at in a part of the world that I think nobody has ever thought about much, and hardly anybody has ever heard of Inuits, much less the fact that Inuits are the sole population that runs all the way across, as I say, from Alaska to Greenland. It's worth pointing out that the Inuits occupy is the largest it's the largest indigenous population that controls more of the global territory than any other indigenous population in the world. So some stuff to think about here, not just in terms of unification of Inuit nationalism and national interests, but also in terms of trying to perhaps demilitarize and place this quite strategic region out of the hands of struggle between the United States and Russia or other forces that are moving across the northern polar regions, and turn it more into a kind of environmental zone of great importance. Greenland and Canadian Inuit territories control vast elements of rare earths and important minerals very much needed to the world. So here's a call for a new awareness on the part of the West, on the part of the world, for the Inuit peoples and the significance, the interlocking character of Greenland with all the rest of northern Canada, which I think could bring some very interesting changes to the geopolitics of that region, and maybe pull it out a little bit of simply being a territory of contestation between the United States and America's perceived enemies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Graham Fuller. If I can throw in a thought to connect these two points that you were discussing, one very well known, another perhaps not so much so, I think there's really a very essential theme here in terms of the northern sea route that you were discussing around Greenland and the traffic going around through the Arctic regions, which the Russians and the Chinese and others are involved in. The issue with the BRICS poses the question of whether or not the United States, as you said, will in fact cooperate with, as opposed to enter into conflict, geopolitical conflict, as the British would have it, with the Chinese, the Russians, and so on. One of the central tenets of British geopolitics has always been controlling choke points. And if you look at not only the question of the northern route as an area of potential cooperation as opposed to conflict, if you looked at Panama and that area as an area of not simply potential conflict, but cooperation, especially if the United States and China were to cooperate to build a new sea level canal through Nicaragua, because after all, even the expanded Panama Canal is in fact outdated compared to the size of modern container ships. If you looked at the Chancay port in Peru, which China is involved in, not as a point of conflict, but one which the United States could cooperate with. And if the Trump approach were one to reject British geopolitics and go with the idea of cooperation, you're looking at an entirely different way of looking at this entire collection of issues. The question of the Oasis plan, in fact, poses exactly that issue in a concrete, immediate, urgent way. And I'd like to underscore Helga's comments at the very outset of the urgency of moving forward with that. It's a point where we can move forward, where the issue posed is exactly that, of destroying British geopolitics based on fighting over choke points and instead developing an entire region. That also ties in with what you were saying on the JCPOA. Iran's relationship to the development prospects, such as in the Oasis plan, are fairly obvious, especially if you link that with the international North-South trade corridor with what's going on there. So anyway, a number of issues. Some of this will come up. We are going to show a clip from our video on the Oasis plan in a minute. But first, Larry Johnson, who is scheduled to speak next, had to run off to do another program at noon. He is hoping to come back at 12:30. So we will hold his spot in line for him to join us when he comes back. And right now, what I'd like to do, Dave, if we can do so, is play the video interview that we have with Alon Lee Green on an Israeli peace activist. Do you have that handy? Thank you.
Okay. Okay, this is Gerald Belsky with the Schiller Institute, and I'm here interviewing Alon Lee Green, who is the co-director of Standing Together in Israel, which I think you could say is the leading peace organization today in Israel, which has been organizing Palestinians and Israelis to change the situation, to make Israel a state where Palestinians are treated equally, and to stop, and you've been fighting, I know, against this war and for a ceasefire. Now that the ceasefire has been initiated, how do you see the role of Standing Together, maybe you can discuss some of the actions you've already taken, but how do you see the role of standing together in organizing for the next phase of the ceasefire and to make sure that there's a durable peace?
So for more than 15 months now, we have fought in all possible levels, on the ground, in the media, in the social media, with partners in parliament, to achieve the end of this war, to achieve this ceasefire, to achieve this deal that releases hostages on one side and ends the killing and destruction and annihilation in Gaza. And we are in a moment of saying that's good. This first phase of the ceasefire is it's an important achievement. For 4 days now, we're speaking at the 4th day of the ceasefire. Gaza was not bombed. For 4 days now, we're seeing people in Gaza that are being allowed to move freely within Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, a lot of them, so many of them, do not have a home to come back to because it was destroyed. We also saw 3 Israeli hostages coming back to their families, Israeli soldiers leaving Gaza Strip, going back to their families. This is a good moment. The problem is that it is a moment that is defined for only 42 days, 38 remains, and 33 hostages. What will happen next? This is the big question. And this is the role of standing together to fight to make this ceasefire not temporary, but permanent, to make this ceasefire a full agreement of withdrawing from Gaza of the Israeli army, of bringing back all the hostages, of stopping all aggressions on Gaza, allowing all Gazans to go back to their cities and towns. And it is not obvious that this will happen because the right wing in Israel that is in power is fighting very strongly to say that this is only temporary and that we are going back to fight Hamas in Gaza in the 43rd day. And right now, both possibilities exist. We can continue to the next phases, and we can also find ourselves back in this catastrophe of killing and bloodshed. So our role is to organize our society into fighting and saying there is a majority, which we have in all polls, a majority of people demanding to see the continuing of this ceasefire, the continuing of the hostage deal. And we already started being in the streets every day, organizing in all cities in Israel to put the public pressure on ending the war. But it will not end even if we are withdrawing from Gaza and returning the hostages and stopping the killing in Gaza, because as you see, as we saw yesterday, our government found ways to move the fronts from Gaza of the war to the West Bank, and now started a military operation in the city of Jenin in the West Bank. So this is another reminder that the fight is for Israeli-Palestinian peace, because next to the aggressions on Gaza, next to the killings there was also, and still is, a military occupation of the West Bank for so many decades, where people are living without basic human rights or civil rights, without being the citizens of the country that controls them militarily, and so on. So this is a bigger fight that we will continue, and our role is to be the agent of change on the ground that organizes Palestinian citizens of Israel, Jewish citizens of Israel in the fight for peace and equality and freedom and independence to all the people on the land. People sometimes do not know, but 20% of the citizens of Israel are Palestinians. They have been under attack since October 7th because people insisted on calling them terrorists, saying that they're supporters of Hamas, coming to schools where Arab Palestinian teachers are teaching, trying to remove them from schools. So we tried to protect the Palestinian community inside Israel, saying we're all in this together. We need to remain in solidarity with each other. Then starting also protecting the aid convoys and aid trucks moving from Jordan and the West Bank to Gaza, because settlers tried to block them at the beginning, but then it even deteriorated into setting them on fire, spilling the food, stealing the food. We created a humanitarian guard of 1,000 people from our movement doing daily shifts, protecting the aid convoys, standing between the trucks and aid and the settlers for weeks, and eventually winning, blocking them and allowing all trucks to move safely to Gaza. And that continued with a huge effort of collecting aid ourselves as Israeli citizens, saying it is not enough just to protect the aid that is coming from Palestinians in the West Bank or the Jordanian government. We also need to understand that the people that are suffering starvation in Gaza, that are suffering diseases, that are being bombed for so many months now, they live in the same land we live on. They share the same homeland we share. And not only that, it is happening to them by us and because of us. So this is the moment to show solidarity. And we moved in a huge campaign. Every second day, we moved to a different locality. We opened a collection center, and just families came with full cars with flour and rice and canned food and hygienic products for women, for babies. And they donated hundreds of trucks that we passed into Gaza for the next few months. Up until today, we're still bringing aid into Gaza. So this is kind of one of the things, one of the biggest things we did in this 15 months. Not only calling to end the war, not only calling to protect Palestinian lives in Gaza, not only calling bring back the hostages, but actually doing something on the ground to combat those in our society, in our government, in our parliament that asks us to lose our humanity.
The Schiller Institute has for a long time promoted the idea that to achieve a two-state solution and to end this constant conflict, which we have seen as being manipulated, frankly, outside of Israel by British imperial forces and imperial forces which in the United States, which are allied with the British, that this war has been deliberately manipulated as a way to create kind of a cockpit for conflict worldwide. And today we see the potential to bring about a lasting peace in both Israel and generally in Southwest Asia through what we call the Oasis plan. And we've long pushed the idea that to have peace, you must have development.
Who funds the killing in Gaza? Who funds the flattening of almost every building in Gaza? It's the US. And I think that you cannot expect the US, that has a negative role in the region, historically and currently, cannot expect them to come and tell us now, we give you candy, we give you treats, we give you some money, and that will be the solution for your problems. The first solution to our problems, the mutual problem of Israelis and Palestinians, is ending the occupation, is achieving a reality of independence to both people that live on this land, while right now there's independence only to one of the two people that live on this land. You cannot bypass this problem, and you cannot create more phases of many years of other projects that are not the core project that is needed, that will just make us wait to the promised reality of freedom and independence to all. And if this will be again an attempt, like the Oslo Accords, like the Barcelona agreements of the 90s, I think we will not be closer to peace. We will actually be closer to another war again.
There's a shift going on in the world for development, ending colonialism, ending all forms of occupation all over the world. And therefore, if we can make the Oasis plan, we think, a model, you could take this and you could apply it by support from all over the world for the same policy and everywhere else, as you see with the Belt and Road Initiative, as you see with the policy of the BRICS for development. But the most important thing, we think, is, since the US has been supporting this war, is to have people in the US see that it is absolutely essential for the US to participate with China and other countries in rebuilding this area. I'm not suggesting that just economic development by itself is going to solve the problem, but we think that without it, you can't get the psychological changes because people have decades of resentment and anger at what was done to them by the other side. So how are you going to change that unless you create a new dynamic of development for the future? Now, we do want to win support among Palestinians for this and Israelis. What do you think of that approach?
I understand that, and I think it should be a major part of the rebuilding after peace, but it cannot be a phase before peace. It cannot be something we say first we do that, and then maybe peace and liberation and freedom and independence will come. Because this, without independence and liberation, means that we are redoing the mistakes that we did in the 90s that didn't bring us to peace. They didn't bring us to peace. We need to disarm the very core causes and root causes for the violence. Because if you will only take this as something that comes without the liberation and freedom, the violence will put all the possible holes in the economical development and programs, and will make it impossible to move forward to peace.
Well, with that, I would just like to add one thing, and we'll end this discussion, which I found very productive. During the 90s, when there was an attempt with the Oslo Accords, I can tell you that what was missing was precisely the implementation. There was discussion of this Oasis plan or aspects of it as part of the Oslo Accords. There were plans to build water projects, but not one economic project that had been part of the Oasis plan, part of the Oslo Accords, was ever built because the World Bank refused to finance any of them. And as long as you don't stop, we thought, if you don't start seeing concrete projects that will change people's lives, then the question of those who want war and want to manipulate violence on both sides is much easier to occur, which is what happened. So what we want to do is correct the mistakes of the past by combining a peace process with massive development that show people you can rebuild for the future. So we think that it must go hand in hand. How about that?
All right. That I understand.
Great. Well, look, thank you very much, Alon Lee. We support the work that you are doing, and we would like to bring a further dialogue and continue to discuss this matter with you. We'll be doing other events, bringing Palestinians and Israelis together with people from all over the world, because this is going to be a global project. And instead of backing war, we want to get the world to back reconstruction and a real peace process that is going to succeed this time.
All right. Interesting.
Thank you very much.
Okay, and thank you to Alon Lee Green and also to Jerry Belsky for that very interesting exchange on some of the thorniest of issues that are posed by the world situation and the genocide, which is still going on in Palestine, as we've discussed, perhaps shifting momentarily from Gaza to the West Bank, but the underlying problem remains to be resolved. Before turning to Helga to respond and discuss some of these aspects, I want everybody to watch a very brief clip that we've selected from our Oasis Plan video to give you an explanation of what this thing might actually look like. So let's show that first and then proceed with the discussion.
LaRouche and his associates developed the Oasis Plan, which included both certain economic aspects of Annex 4 of the 1993 Oslo Accord, which was called the Protocol on Israeli-Palestinian Cooperation Concerning Regional Development Programs. Plus, it called for additional crucial water, power, and other projects that LaRouche noted were needed in the mid-1970s. This plan, the Oasis Plan, focused primarily on addressing the greatest barrier to development in the region, the shortage of fresh water, through the construction of a network of desalination plants that could turn the plentiful seawater into fresh water. And these plants would not only be on the Mediterranean coast, they would be built along 2 new canals, one connecting the Red Sea with the Dead Sea, and another connecting it to the Mediterranean. To be clear, these new canals or aqueducts are not for cargo shipping, as an alternative to the Suez Canal. Their purpose is to transport water. Now, because of the low elevation of the Dead Sea, which is more than 400 meters below sea level, the flowing water could also provide hydropower, electricity along the way, which could help power the desalination plants and development more generally. The plants could also be powered by the large quantities of natural gas off the shores of Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and Egypt. But most importantly, the Oasis plan calls for going beyond hydropower and chemical fuels altogether, through the construction of nuclear power complexes along these canals and on the shores of the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, to produce plentiful electricity and to desalinate seawater to green the vast deserts of the region and to power an industrialization process in Palestine, in Israel, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. The use of nuclear power for energy would liberate the region's hydrocarbon resources to be used chemically to produce industrial materials through intermediate petrochemical products. The nuclear-powered complexes could use inherently safe, pebble-bed, high-temperature gas-cooled reactors of the type just brought into operation in Shidao Bay, China. The new man-made rivers created by desalination will tremendously expand the potential for agricultural and industrial development across the region, making the deserts and the economies bloom. LaRouche explained the necessity of developing new sources of water in a 1994 speech. LaRouche: one cannot meet the indices of water consumption for a modern population, for both the Palestinian and Israeli populations, under present conditions. There is a conflict over water because the Israelis have, frankly, been using their conquests to take water from everybody. It's one of the conflicts with Syria on the Golan Heights issue. It involves in Lebanon the Litani River and things of that sort. So the power and water development have to be accompanied by a network of transportation infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Just a small taste of that very important video. We'll put the link for that video in the chat in a moment for people to make sure they take a look and view the entire thing. Helga, your thoughts on what has been discussed so far and this concluding point in particular?
Well, I think the one thing to really understand is this Oasis plan, in my view, will only work if the large strategic parameters change, and they are about to change. Because, as the British said, since Sykes-Picot, the whole region always has been the cockpit for geopolitical manipulation, the great game Brzezinski was talking about. And, so therefore, since all the decisions made on the ground always have that strategic background, I'm absolutely certain that the only secure way how the Oasis plan can be realized is if the large powers agree on it. That, however, is a potential which has probably never been so close as just right this minute, because when President Trump called President Xi Jinping, they discussed, and basically Trump said, if the United States and China work together, we can solve all the problems on the planet. And I'm absolutely certain that that is true, that it can be done. And if there is an attempt to apply that principle in the Middle East, it's now. I think the potential for China to work together with the United States in providing some technical assistance. We had a conference of the Schiller Institute beginning of December, where that issue was discussed, and one of the experts who spoke about it was Professor Zhang Weiwei from Fudan University. And he, on that conference, said China has the means to implement the Oasis plan. Now, there are other Chinese scholars, such as Ding Yifan, who wrote a whole book about, Chinese development plans, including the transformation of a large desert in the northeast of China, where there was absolutely nothing before. It was desert, it was poverty. But then through modern methods of creation of new water, China was able to irrigate a territory of the size of Germany. And where there was desert before, there is now forests and agriculture, tourism. The poor peasants have become rich farmers, and general prosperity is there. So China has offered to, help in other regions of the desert, the Great Desert, which is stretching from the African coast on the Atlantic all the way across the Sahel zone, Sahara, to the Saudi Peninsula, all the way to Iran, into China, into the north. This whole gigantic belt of desert, which is growing right now, can be reversed by modern technological means. And, I would really see it as that incredible chance, that if there would be an agreement between the United States and China, and then, other countries can come into the play, because, is it really in the interest of Israel to keep producing enemies generation after generation, and especially after the recent development? There are many experts who have expressed concern, that this may be the beginning of the end of Israel, because if you cause so many people around your territory to start hating you even more than before, this should be regarded as a massive security threat to Israel. On the other side, if all the neighbors, the Gulf states, who have tremendous means, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Qatar, some of the smaller states, they all have an interest that this region becomes rich and prosperous, that, once you start to irrigate the region, turning it into Greenland, a new Greenland. Greenland doesn't have to be only in Greenland, because Greenland only was called Greenland because there was a time where a lot of growth was there because of the weather cycle having created warmer weather. In this case, it could become a Greenland as the result of human intervention. So I think the potential is there. I think the neighbor countries have either they have the potential to help, or they are in dire need themselves, like Syria, like Yemen, like Iraq, like Afghanistan. Large powers like Iran, India, Russia, China, they all have an interest that this region becomes peaceful. Nobody has an interest that this is remaining a source of terrorism and instability, other than those forces in the world who still think they can manipulate through geopolitical games, which has been their specificity for decades or centuries. Now, I think this is an enormous potential, and that's why we have called for an all-out mobilization. We want to generate statements. We want people to discuss it. We want to have people saying, yes, this is the solution which we would support. And I think we could, at this moment, completely influence the climate to make it happen.
Great. Thanks, Helga. Graham, hold your thought. I do want to ask for your comments on some of this, but Larry Johnson has just rejoined us, and so we want to ask him to let us know what his view of the situation is. Larry, go ahead.
Well, let me just speak real briefly to whether or not Trump will be able to secure a negotiated end to the war in Ukraine. We've got both political theater that we can see, and then the behind-the-scenes activities that are not well observed. I think actually what we've had is Trump has now cut off aid to Ukraine for 90 days. The executive order he issued on his first day in office, suspending all foreign aid, also applied, my understanding, to Ukraine. And in addition to that, the people who were working the Ukraine issue at the Department of Defense, handling the logistics, handling the movement of materiel and weapons, they were sent packing. So one of the ways to be very effective in a bureaucracy and cutting off that kind of activity is you get rid of the people and you suspend the authority. On the other hand, on the public front, Trump, we now have clear evidence that the CIA is lying to Donald Trump, and that Trump is taking the bait wholeheartedly. How do we know Trump is lying and that it is the CIA providing it? David Ignatius did us a favor with his typical job as the CIA stenographer a few days ago, doing a hagiography on Bill Burns, titled it "Mild Bill Burns," doing a play off of Wild Bill Donovan, the head of the CIA doing in its form as the OSS, and touting Burns' major accomplishments. And in the course of this discussion, Burns says that the CIA believes that its estimate is 700,000 Russians have been killed, and that it's that their casualties far outweigh those of Ukraine. Well, that's exactly what Trump is saying, and so Trump didn't have didn't come up with that number on his own. That number came from CIA. CIA has perpetuated the lies about the number of Russian casualties. They perpetuated lies about the state of the Russian economy. And the New York Times even admitted, I guess, as this morning, that the intelligence community has been covering up the actual numbers of Ukrainian casualties. So Trump, in terms of his outward behavior, is doing all the wrong things, sending all the wrong signals to Russia, because he thinks he's got some leverage that he can coerce Russia, because Trump believes that Russia is reeling from massive casualties and a struggling economy. Once he discovers that that's not the case, and that Vladimir Putin's terms are very simple: the end of Ukraine as a military threat to Russia, the end of all NATO support for Ukraine, and elimination of any possibility that Ukraine would ever become a member of NATO, and the complete change of the Ukrainian government to eliminate the Nazis that are there. Once Trump understands that and realizes that Putin is in no rush to reach an agreement, and Trump has no leverage over him, and I can't rule out the possibility that Putin, watching the fact that the United States has cut off all aid to Ukraine for a 90-day period, and what makes that 90-day period important is Trump has also ordered an audit of DOD, an audit of where all this money has gone. So this could be, this may be a clever way of Trump to eliminate the Ukraine problem without having to actually go out and do it in public, do a public execution of it. I'll stop there.
Okay, thanks. I'm sure we'll take up a number of these things in the Q&A session, which will begin momentarily. Graham, do you have any further thoughts you want to throw in before we head into that part of the discussion? You're muted. Yeah.
No, Dennis, except I'm glad you raised at the end. I had neglected to mention the linkage between the whole GCPOA situation and potential negotiations and the Oasis plan. Indeed, Iran is an integral part. It's a very dry country in environmental terms. So I think the win-win, to use what seems to be a Chinese term, unfortunately not a Western term, the win-win elements of working for a new nuclear agreement with Iran, and in conjunction with a Oasis plan that certainly is in Russia's interest. Russia is deeply concerned with the economies of all of the stands, Kazakhstan and other areas of that region of Central Asia. So I think there's a lot of common interest between the United States and Russia if they choose to pursue that policy, and water, along with nuclear energy, both in trying to stop nuclear weapons, but also in trying to expand the use of nuclear power to generate electricity and energy, so sorely needed in that region.
Okay, very good. Thanks a whole lot. We are now going to be moving into the Q&A discussion period of this IPC meeting. What that means is that the transmission, the broadcast on YouTube will be ending momentarily. Those who want to continue and to participate in this discussion can do so. What you need to do is go to schillerinstitute.com, and at the top of the page, you will find the registration blank to join the Zoom meeting. So if you want to stay on, participate in the discussion, ask questions, comments, and so on, now is the time to do that so that you don't miss anything. And with that, I think, Dave, you can end the streaming part of this. And once that's done, let